As Stephen Hawking once said, scientists have become the bearers of the torch of discovery in our quest for knowledge. Today, amongst us, we have the torchbearers for the next generation, whose thirst for knowledge remains limitless. We are gathered here today to virtually commence the second edition of the eScience Fair. Over the course of the last year, we have seen the wonders of science excel even in the harsh conditions of the pandemic. Scientists internationally have unified for the greater good and have embarked on a journey similar to that of the students present here today. The diversity within the audience here today indicates the limitless nature even in the darkest of times such as these. We are glad to have the students across Jaipur join us with students from 6th all the way to 11th grade. When looking back over last year's events, we can certainly say that we have exponentially grown, not only in reach but also in creativity. I can proudly say that we have added two more segments to last year's eScience Fair, allowing the student scientific community to expand and become more inclusive. We are here to make history, my fellow students and respected professor, as we view the creativity, the intellect, and the uniqueness of the next generation of scientists, researchers, and professionals. Without further ado, I would like to wish all the participants here the best of luck for their respective events, and I would like to thank Professor Anish for being here today. Without further ado, Rushal, would you like to take over?
Today, we have with us Dr. Ashish Mahabal. Ashish Mahabal is an astronomer and lead computational and data scientist at the prestigious California Institute of Technology. He started his journey from Nagpur University, where he completed his master's in physics, mathematics, and electronics. And then he completed his PhD in astronomy from the Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics, Pune, India. His interests include large sky surveys, classification, deep learning, and methodology transfers to other complex data fields like medicine. Furthermore, he leads the ML for this Wiki Transient facility, a new large survey covering the entire northern sky every few nights. He also works with the data science group at the Jet Propulsion Lab and is a part of the Early Detection Research Network for Cancer and MCL. I'm sure your journey is going to inspire all these young minds present here. Over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for the warm welcome. I'm going to share my screen and show a few slides. So let's see, let me know once you start seeing the screen.
Yes, sir, it's visible now.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
And do you see the full screen now?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so thank you again for inviting me here and to speak to the students who are involved in the science fair. That's a great thing that you are putting together and they're participating. I am sure they're having a lot of fun. And because this is related to STEM, I'm sure their projects are related to all different parts of the science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and so on. So Rochelle already mentioned my journey. What I would like to say is that I immensely enjoyed doing basic science. And I think that is something that if you get a good grounding in, then you can go to any field that you want to. So make sure that you do your basic mathematics well, if possible, some basic statistics, a little bit of basic biology and basic physics. If you do that, then you can get into any field because mathematics and physics combine to do engineering and technology and all that. So I started from Nagpur, and what happened there was that the way things were is that before that I had been in much smaller towns. So Nagpur was a big town for me when I went for my bachelor's and then for my master's. And so when I was there, I started gradually learning about various things. I used to read a lot in Scientific American and try to go to the library and find out what is the latest that's happening in science and so on. And that helped me a lot. So asking questions, I think that was one of the big things that helped me because many times teachers would go out of their way to help find the answers because the questions that you can come up with need not be in your main course. So related to course, of course, there'll be questions, I'm sure you ask them, but also when you read new news items, many times the teachers may not be equipped with that, but they generally go out of their way to help you with that. So try to look for things that interest you and don't feel shy about asking things related to that. And then when I went to Ayuka for my PhD, again, there were excellent teachers there, and then getting a good grounding in different things is important. And so so long as you keep on doing extracurricular activities, including things like science fair, I think that again gives you access to many different things. So after that, I went to PRL Ahmedabad for about a year for a postdoc. And then I came to Caltech, where I have been for a long time now. And as Rushil mentioned, I work on mini sky surveys where a lot of data is involved. So in the Zwicky transient facility, for instance, we get 1.4 terabytes of data every night, and we reduce all of that in real time. But the first survey that I worked on after coming here for a few years, the total data there was only 3 terabytes. That was about 20 years ago. And you can see that in just 2 nights, we get the data that the earlier survey had taken 15 years to compile. So that is where we are now. Things are changing rapidly, and every new generation is luckier that way because you have access to better technology, you have access to better communication, you have access to faster computers, good internet, and so on. So make sure that you try to make the best of it. What I'm going to do in these few slides is bring out a few points that may not be always brought out. So as I said, these are exciting times. Vaccine research it has advanced fast for perhaps the wrong reason. We shouldn't have been in the pandemic, and your science fair should really have been in person. But even in that, when the pandemic happened, people really worked hard, and the vaccine that were created, several of them actually were in a matter of several months. And that's really record time. Not full testing was done, but enough testing was done, and emergency use was allowed for that. And that has helped a lot. So some of you may not, maybe too young for the vaccine to be taken, or there may not be enough supplies, but make sure that your parents are vaccinated, for instance, and that is true. In terms of space missions, there are many, many exciting things happening. So recently, a US rover landed on Mars. India has had missions to Moon and Mars, and now even space tourism is starting. So again, within your lifetime, you're going to see some very exciting times. Recently, you may have heard that the protein structure was also, I won't say solved, but for a large number of proteins within our DNAs now, or rather the DNAs that can generate these proteins, we have structures for them, and that's getting better and better. So many advances are happening related to life sciences, computing related to that, and so on. And again, the sky is the limit even for that. So one of the things that I would definitely like to say is that try to read the latest science news and pay attention to basics, because all these things are built on basics. If you know your basics, then that is going to get you into whatever you want to do. And even when you talk of just India, there are many mega science projects going on. So I have listed on the left-hand side a list, the Large Hadron Collider and FAIR and INO-ITER. The last three ones, LIGO, TMT, and SK, they are related to astronomy. So I'll just say a little bit related to that. LIGO is the Laser Interferometric Gravitational Wave Observatory, and India is starting to build another instance of it. There are two in the US, and a different kind of version is there in Italy. And those are the ones that are finding very interesting objects. So most of the astronomy that has been done so far, optical wavelengths, infrared wavelengths, ultraviolet wavelengths, X-ray wavelengths, radio wavelengths, they're all electromagnetic. Whereas gravitational waves, they open up a completely new window. And the third window that has opened up is neutrino physics. So those three together are giving us new views into the cosmos, into the universe. So again, exciting times. TMT is the 30-meter telescope, and India is contributing to that. So the biggest telescope right now has a diameter of about 10 meters. Compare that to your eye, which is about 1 centimeter, and now TMT will be 30 meters. So, and even if these are telescopes, a lot of technology is needed for that. So it's not as if you need only scientists who sit in their laboratories and do things, right? I think you're going to need very hands-on things. So many kinds of things that you're, I'm sure, doing in the science fair are going to be on a bigger scale used in something like that. The third project is SK, the Square Kilometer Array. So I mentioned that our eye is 1 centimeter, 30-meter telescope. So you can think how big that is. But when we say square kilometer array, there the receiving area is going to be a total of square kilometer. You can imagine how big it is. But of course, it is not in optical, it is in radio. And the way they are doing it is that they have split it so that half of it is in South Africa and half in Australia. And that's starting up very soon. And there are many places in India that are closely connected to these projects. So again, a lot of technology and science, basic science related things happening there. So make sure that you read about these, take more interest in that, and so on. So, but those are not the only opportunities. What I would also urge you to do is that you should imagine big. Don't make just India your center of consciousness, your focus. That you should do anyway, but also be a humanist and be a world citizen. Look at the entire world as your playground and make sure that you try to do the best that you can for everyone in the world. So anything you do, you can create opportunities. So you don't have to go into the standard various occupations that were touted before, like engineering or doctor or scientist. But the opportunities now are available for anyone who has basic education, and they can create new kinds of avenues for themselves and for others. So keep that in mind, think big as you go along. Here is a slightly different twist that I would put. So this is a sentence from Magnus Pike, who's a nutritional scientist and scientific advisor. He says, if it squirms, it's biology. If it stings, it's chemistry. If it doesn't work, it's physics. And if you can't understand it, it's mathematics. Now you can see that this is stated tongue-in-cheek fashion, but there is a very important message here. There's also a lot of misinformation in the society. And one of your tasks as you learn many different things is to also take that knowledge to everybody. Make sure that whatever you learn, you can give elevator speeches on that. That is, whatever you learn in 2 minutes, you should be able to describe that to someone who does not have the same background as you. That is how you will know that you know it, being able to tell it to someone. So strive to take your knowledge to society. Try to reduce the misinformation in the society. Try to reduce the false things that go around in the society. That is part of the science that you do. That is how humanity can improve. Another thing that you can say in mathematics, for instance, is that all models are wrong, but some models are useful. This is by George Box, a statistician. So the thing related to this that I would like to say is strive to test things. Don't blindly believe things. There are many things that you'll be told, but try to go to the first principles for everything as far as possible and try to make sure that you understand them. And then you can believe it only if you can do it or you can derive it and related things. So there should be a way. You may need to look at books, you may need to look at various other things, but don't just believe things. And that also translates to being hands-on. Try things out. Again, you are part of science fairs, so I'm sure you're trying that already, but take that as much to the extreme as possible. Finally, take your STEM everywhere. Don't keep your science restricted to your workplace and practice superstition at home, right? You don't want to practice superstition at home. There are many instances that happen where people are great engineers, they are great with their hands, they build wonderful instruments, but when they go home, they put their scientific knowledge away and believe in all kinds of superstitions that are unscientific. Make sure that you don't do that. Plus, it is your duty to try to make sure that others go away from superstitions also. So use your science actively to dispel misinformation and superstitions in the society. And with those words, I'd like to end this note. Have fun with your science fair and keep on doing science. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, Professor. Uh, I know that was a really interesting talk, and I know you probably are limited on time, but we would love to ask you a few questions if you don't mind. Rachel, go ahead.
So, sir, we've been seeing that you've worked on multiple projects, whether it be on based on optically missed nova or the different fields of medicine. So how would you describe the life of a scientist to be, and what made you gravitate towards these particular topics rather than other fields of science?
Right. Good questions. So I think a day in the life of a scientist depends a lot on the area that the scientist is in. So for many theoreticians, for instance, it can be just their lab. They sit in their office, pull up their computer or pad and pen, and they can work equations on that. As an astronomer, initially I spent a large number of nights at telescopes, so staying up all night looking through. Well, we don't put your eye to the telescope because you have a computer directly attached to the telescope for last few decades. So that collects the data, but then you look on your computer as to, you have to direct the telescope, look at those data and see whether things are happening right, and then bring the data back and analyze that. But now even the telescopes are automated. So the Zwicky transient facility that was mentioned earlier, which collects 1.4 terabyte of data, there's a program that is generated for that afternoon, and then the robotic telescope just goes on taking data. The data gets collected. It gets taken at the Palomar Observatory in San Diego County, and in a matter of minutes, it is processed at Caltech. And then, in fact, we look for transients in that. These are objects that change in brightness, and we release that to the world because other telescopes can then be moved to that, so that immediately you can try to follow up interesting objects that may otherwise fade in a matter of seconds or minutes or hours. So that is one aspect of astronomy. But when I started doing this astronomy, I got into big data. And by big data, as I mentioned, it's a nightly terabytes kind of thing right now. So we are talking of petabytes of data here. And when you do that, you have to rely more and more on computers. Humans cannot look at all the data. So you need to be able to figure out methodology which will abstract the data, try to find those instances in it which are different from the rest of the data. And so you need to get into computing. You build big computational systems which then extract and abstract the most interesting bits. To do that, one has to clean the data because there can be defects in that. There is a signature of the atmosphere that comes into the images. There is a signature of the instruments that comes into the data. So you take that out. And having done that, then the data are ready for analysis. Then you can look for all kinds of things, the transients that I mentioned, for instance. Is there a supernova in this? Is there a quasar here? Or is there some kind of nova? Or is it just a variable star of a different kind, etc. Right? And so once you start abstracting these data sets, then the questions you ask can be the same depending irrespective of the science that you're doing. So for instance, if I were to put together a cancer related data set, once I create a good table, which has lots of rows and lots of columns, then many of the data science questions that I can be asking can be similar. So the domain scientist who has knowledge about cancer or about astronomy has to be in the loop. So you cannot take that person completely out, but there are a lot of automated things that you can do on your own and then have that interaction where that person can tell you whether that is right. So I'm not a cancer scientist by training. I am an astronomer by training. So I am a domain scientist in astronomy. And over the years, because of big data, I've learned how to handle big data, do a lot of computation. So in astronomy, I could do both the roles, being a data scientist and being the domain scientist. And doing that, I honed various things where I could see how the domain scientist has to come in a fraction of the time. Much of the time it can be data scientist. And then I started getting into these other collaborations where then I started acting primarily as a data scientist, but collaborating with domain scientists in these other areas. So I work with a large number of cancer experts and interacting with them. Then they tell me what the data that they have. Then I bring the data in, then I can change the data sets, change in the sense that I can take out the bad bits in that. There may be some missing items, so remove rows related to that, remove certain columns, and in some sense cleans the data so we have a good data set. And then we can do some automated processing on that and then take it back to the cancer experts, and then we interact that way and decide what the next questions that can be asked and what we can learn from it and so on. So it is a long cycle, but many parts can be automated, and those parts are very similar to something in astronomy and would be the same in earth science and would be the same in many other sets. So identifying which parts can be done by the data scientists, identifying where you need to bring the domain expert, when that should happen, and building it into a workflow is the cycle that one has to go through.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. I had one other question. Right now, if you can see, girls in STEM is something that we don't usually see. We what's considered is we always see boys stand up and do science. So what is something you would like tell all the girls here about science, and why is science, pursuing science is something that we genuinely
Well,
focus upon? Should be done?
they are not different. They're humans. They should do everything that boys do. They should not stay behind in anything at all. I won't give them separate advice. They should not expect separate advice. They should do exactly what boys can do. And in fact, what I would say is that one thing that I would say is that many times from the families, there can be opposition from the parents that you're a girl, don't do this and do. They should be able to stand on their own and be able to say that they're also human beings. They have also the right to do whatever they want to do. Because when you're learning all this, right, that education needs to be properly used. Otherwise, why learn at all? So be sure that you are assertive in those terms. Don't be disrespectful, but be assertive. Learn what your rights are and be able to stand on your own and do what you want to do. And it doesn't have to be the standard professions, as I said. It can be a wide variety of things.
So just to add on, Professor, I also had a small question. What would you say are the biggest restrictions or challenges in today's date in terms of the data science or astronomy, like in
Sorry, I think
the
your
medical
voice was
fields?
breaking up a little bit. Can you repeat, please?
Professor, I was asking you, what do you think the biggest restrictions or challenges are in today's date in terms of the data science community?
Okay, one of the interesting challenges that comes is because of something that has become common. What happens now is that there are many libraries available, many data science tools that are available. So what happens because of that, sometimes they get used blindly. And because of that, there is a problem in data science called overfitting. So you have a small data set, but you use a very heavy tool on that. And whenever you use any tool on any data set, it's going to give you answers. But whether the answers are right or not is something that you need to be able to validate. So you need to have set aside certain data sets which you can use for validating the data. And that's very important. So keeping that mind is critical. Otherwise, there can be overuse, there can be overfitting, because what we call that is torturing the data. If you torture the data, it is going to give you an answer. That answer may be true, may not be true, but you need to have a way to validate that. So that is one of the big challenges right now. But it's a good challenge in a way, because what that means is that we have good tools. And so the important thing is generating more data. And there are many ways of generating more data. And so we should make sure that we can gather as much data as we have. So take the Indian setting, for instance, because there are so many people, if you get into something like citizen science or venture into areas where the data collection can be done in some automated fashion for a long time, keeping in mind the privacy of the people. So make sure that you don't override the privacy. But with that in mind, you can collect lots of data on lots of interesting things and do a lot of fun things. So things related to weather, things related to uh, racial justice and all those. So minorities, how that has to come into picture. So in data science, in many of the models, there is a lot of bias because you gather data where you can. And when that happens, the biases automatically seep in. So what happens then is that the answers you may get will typically be related to the majority community that is there. And when inputs come related to minority community, you can get wrong answers, biased answers, wrong answers. So you have to make sure that there is a balance in the data also. So try to collect data where that bias will go away. So trying to understand those biases is, I would say, one of the most important things that needs to happen.
Definitely. So I had another question for you. As a computer science and STEM student myself, I think it's any science student's dream to reach a point in their career like yourself. What has been the best part of being a researcher, a professor, and a scientist, and what has been the most difficult part in your journey?
Well, the best part is that you get to learn about the latest happenings and try to explore many of them. So that is definitely true. And what happens is that the difficult thing is that sometimes you have to stick to some things that you have said. So many times you'll have temptations. Oh, this is the latest thing. Let me go after that. But no, if you have made a commitment, I think you need to go after that. So there can be a period where you say that you're going to follow this path. So for a certain bit, you need to follow that. But that's also a good thing, because then what you're doing is that you are getting deeper and deeper into the topic. And as you do that, what's going to happen is that you get better at it, you can help others get better at it. So teaching it to others, taking it to others is a great advantage also. So what you learn, if you keep on passing it to others, that is something that is a boon in this field.
Okay, sir. So on another note, I have a lighter question. So we've seen that you're also interested in ornithology. So how did you get into that, and what made you gravitate towards it?
Okay, so this was when I was in Ahmedabad for a year. And when you go to that part of India, it's somewhat dry in general. But the area that we lived in Ahmedabad was near Atira, near PRL and IIM. And that was like an oasis. So many birds that would be around would gravitate towards that area. And so just from the balcony of the place where we were, I could identify up to 50 different species. And having seen this variety, that is why I got interested. And once I got interested, then I started seeking them out and then cataloging them, keeping records on them. And then that was in India. Then I went to various other national parks in India. And then when I came in the US, I continued doing that. So it needs some kind of impetus, I guess. And in my case, it was the being able to see so many species nearby.
Awesome. Any other questions, guys? If anyone has any. Otherwise, I think we can start wrapping up the closing ceremony. I mean, opening ceremony. Thank you so much, Professor Ashish, for joining us today. I would just like to say what an inspiration you are, and for every girl and boy watching this webinar. And it was an absolute honor being able to converse with you and hear your story. And I think I speak for all of us when I say every single piece of advice that you've given us today. It is going to go a long way for all of us. And as a fellow woman in STEM, it was extremely reassuring to know that it's going to it's going to be a really great journey and a lot of fun. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope to see you soon. And please stay in touch. And we'd love to have you for more webinars at our school also. So yeah, that's about it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me, and have fun at the science fair.
Thank you so much, sir.
Bye.